This is Fountain
Every
Street
week I find
Church.
it hard to find the best ones, but somehow, like I said, you'll hear what I'm trying to say even when the words
Here,
aren't right.
we strive to free the mind, grow the soul, and change the world. Here, there is freedom to doubt and freedom to believe. Here, you can find a house of prayer for all people.
The swallow up Jonah.
Welcome to Fountain Street Church. Join us on the journey.
Preparing to speak in front of you on a Sunday service is kind of like jumping out of a plane. It's really not something you want to know about way in advance. You want to just do it. Because if you know about it way in advance, you'll obsess about it, you'll procrastinate about it, all of your mental illnesses will weigh in about it. And I mean, I have known about this since February. When I got a message on Facebook from Sarah Hibbard-Swaney, the religious committee chair, asking me which date I wanted to speak and what I wanted to speak about. I mean, I was in India, okay? I mean, I was busy taking yoga, I'm meeting new gurus, I'm hugging Amma at the ashram. I was busy. I didn't want to think about it. But because I've known about it for so long, I have fiercely avoided it with every fiber of my body. I mean, I've done everything I could possibly do to sit down and get intimate with myself so that I could turn around and get intimate with you. I've cleaned my closets. I've cleaned up my neighborhood. I've trimmed trees in the neighborhood. I've trimmed toenails. I've cleaned out my mother's closet, and she never lets me do that. I've given stuff away by the truckload. I have gotten so much done. Holy Toledo. And I've gotten everything done, which is, with the exception of writing the sermon, just so you know, for the last 3 weeks, all my demons were out. All of my mental illnesses were here in full swing, because that's when I really started thinking about it and just contemplating what I wanted to talk about. And all of my mental illnesses told me I cannot write, I cannot speak, I have nothing to say, I'm not funny. All of this racket was going on in here. It's crazy. But instead, I decided to show up at 9 o'clock this morning. So the first thing I want to tell you is that I'm one of you, okay? Every Sunday I come, and I'm sitting right there in the pew. And because that's where I am all the time, well, at least for Christmas and Easter. But what happened one day was I was sitting in the great social hall, doing what I do best. I was being social. And I was sitting at a table with Ellen Chamberlain and Charlie Gallmeyer. Are they here? But Alice is. Of course they're not here. That's another thing. What good is it to have friends who have cottages when they're at their cottages for the summer and we're here? What is that? So anyway, I am sitting with Ellen Chamberlain, Charlie Gallmeyer, and we're talking. You know, they have been talking about moving and downsizing for 10 years. And I'm a realtor, so I've been listening to this. And so I was having this lively conversation with Charlie and Ellen about, you know, giving them some strategies of how they could, you know, get past this and get to the next step. And I thought we were really getting somewhere. Oh, and I was telling them a story about the last house I had sold, which was a big house in East Grand Rapids it belonged to Tom and Laura Conrad. And I was telling them about the fact that Laura and I were literally packing up the entire house, and it was a 4,000 square foot, you know, sprawling 1950s ranch. And while they had updated, you know, this much of it 20 years ago, there was still, you know, 3,500 square feet of it that they hadn't updated. And so Laura and I were systematically going through the house and kind of undating it. And Tom would come home every night, and he'd see us there, and he would go and get his scotch. And he would go and sit in his favorite chair. And then one night he turned to Laura and I and he said, you know, you girls, I feel like kind of a fill-in-the-blank hole. Because I'm sitting here watching football and you girls are doing all the work. And at that point, Laura, the wife, turns to Tom and says, well, Tom, that's because you are a fill-in-the-blank hole. And so I was telling the Gallmeyers this story, you know, and trying to get them past, you know, I didn't want them to fall in the pitfalls of, you know, selling the house and all this kind of thing. And I got all done with that. And Charlie says to me, Amy, you should talk about this at church. You should tell people these stories. You should do a sermon. And unbeknownst to me, there was a person that had come up and sat at the table at about halfway through the conversation. And he turned and said, and I can make that happen because I'm on the religious services committee. Would you like to talk at church? And I just said, well, sure. And I never thought about it again until I got an email, actually a Facebook message from Sarah Hibbard Sweeney in February, asking me what I'd like to talk about and what date would I like. So that's how it happened, that I got from the pew to the pulpit, which I really am not comfortable standing behind here, and besides I wanted you to see my cute red shoes. And that, nothing else. So what I learned in that is that, well, Charlie really needs to be careful what he wishes for others, because your wish for them just comes true, and in this case, instantaneously. And when the universe smiles on you, and in this case, the universe was the religious committee chair guy who sat down at the table, and when that happens, just say yes. Because I can tell you, when you get outside of your comfort zone, that is when your life starts. And I'm definitely outside of my comfort zone in this moment. And finally, the other thing I learned is when I'm back in the pew, sitting next to you, Christmas or Easter, it is important to have little to no expectations of the person sitting next to you, because they just might be the person up here. So I'm just going to tell you a couple of stories, and then we'll leave it at that. And I'm going to start with this one. I used to live out on the Thornapple River in this wonderful house that I built with my partner. And we always used to leave the garage door open because we had this wonderful dog who liked to sit on the throne out there and watch the squirrels and everything. And what would happen is these hummingbirds would come in the garage. And so I always left the garage door open. And one day I was getting ready, I had to go somewhere, and I came out and I heard all this fluttering. And I looked, and here was this hummingbird in the garage. And because I was in a hurry, I didn't take any more time than that, and I left, and I came home late that night, got out of the car, and I didn't hear anything, so I thought, oh good, he's gone. Went to bed, got up the next morning, opened the door, came out, didn't hear anything. Thought, great, got out the door. And then I looked up, and here was this little hummingbird. And he had hung himself on the garage door wire. And I felt so bad. I felt so bad because I hadn't taken the time to just shoo him out of the garage. And so, later that afternoon, my good friend Linda Troyer was coming over. Anybody know Linda Troyer? You know Linda Troyer. You know Linda Troyer. Linda Troyer is one of my best friends. And she's just one of these rock-solid human beings. She's always there for you. Okay, she's a skeptic. She's a non-believer. But she's an amazing person. Anyway, she was coming over to help me with a business plan because we had a business together, and she's just so good at that. And all of my nutty people come out when I have to do things like that. So I heard her car come up, and I went out in the garage, and I heard the fluttering again. And Linda got out of the car, and I said, "Oh, Linda, you know, there's a hummingbird here." And then I told her the story of what had happened the night before. And so I said to her, "Linda, we are not going to let that hummingbird get into trouble. We're going to save that hummingbird. Because, Linda, everybody needs to be saved every once in a while." So I said, I had left the ladder out in the middle of the garage, so I just climbed up the top of the ladder. I said, "Linda, I'm going to put my hand out, and I'm going to put my finger out, and that hummingbird is going to land on my finger." And of course, being the skeptic that she is, she said, "Yeah, right, Amy. That hummingbird is not going to land on your finger." So I got on the ladder, put my finger up, and the hummingbird is over at the window smashing himself into the window. And I said, "Linda, let's just give him some time. He's not ready to be saved. Let's go have a couple frozen margaritas, shall we?" So we go into the kitchen, whip up a couple frozen margaritas, and we're talking about our business plan for about 20 minutes, and then I say, "Okay, let's go check on the hummingbird." So we go back out in the garage, I climb up the ladder, I stick my finger out, look at the hummingbird, call nicely to it, and it just continues to smash into the window. Why do they do that? I say to Linda, "Oh, well, let's go have another frozen margarita." So we go back in the kitchen, have another frozen margarita. Anybody who knows me knows I can't drink that many frozen margaritas without having some kind of effect. So 20 minutes go by, I go, "Let's go check on the hummingbird." So we go back out into the garage. I very gingerly climb up the ladder, and I stick my finger out with a little flare. And I turn to the hummingbird, and I called nicely to it, "Come on over, I'm ready for you." And the hummingbird comes over and lands on my finger. And I look at Linda's face, and there are tears running down her face as I have this hummingbird in my finger on the top of a ladder having 2 frozen margaritas. At which point I reach my hand up and I grab the hummingbird in my hand. Now, if you've ever had anybody here had a hummingbird in their hand? Oh, David. Then you know. I sat there with a hummingbird in my hand on the top of the ladder, and you can feel its heart beating 1,000,000 times a minute. And you can hear this little voice chirping. And so my life is a musical comedy, okay? So at that point, I turn to Linda, and I have the hummingbird in my hand. I go, "How do you hold a moonbeam in your hand?" And Linda is cracking up, and I said, "Okay, it's time to let this hummingbird go free." So I climb down the ladder, walk out in the driveway, and I let the hummingbird go. And at the exact moment I did that, the skies opened up, and it was a torrential downpour. And I have 47 windows in this house I had built, and every single one of them is open because it's summer and it's hot and I don't have an air conditioner. It's like, "Linda, we got to close all the windows." So we run through the house, start cranking the windows closed. I run up into my bedroom, and it has only one window, and I start closing the window, cranking it closed, and all of a sudden, the hummingbird comes up in the glass of the window and hovers right in front of me.